Change is happening all around. It's always been the only constant, but now it appears almost inevitable everywhere, and CEOs are even calling themselves Chief Change Officers. The thing is, not many people vote for change. Employees like stability. But change is being forced upon leaders, especially in working conditions and facilities such as offices. I wanted to know how to do change humanely and how leaders should be working with their teams now to create the ideal functioning business of the future. So who better to revisit than the CEO of Advanced Workplace Associates, Andrew Mawson. Nice to see you again, Andrew.
Yeah, good to see you too, Malcolm. Thanks for the invitation.
My pleasure. It's delightful to see you. Andrew, daily we hear not just of the losses of hundreds of jobs, but in many thousands of jobs. Now, that must create a ripple of unrest in so many companies. I do understand that change may be causing the need for restructure, but surely there's a more humane way to re-engineer for the future and hopefully not lose so much talented human capital.
No, I would agree with you. I think companies, the goodness or otherwise of the leadership of an organization and what it really stands for matters enormously at the point where an organization is a little distressed and feels the need to part company with some of its people, which is never going to be a great idea for anybody. And I think one of the challenges that companies have is that regardless of whether they create it or not, there is a sort of an implied certainty associated with an employment contract. And when the day comes when the company can no longer afford the services of an individual, it comes as something of a shock. And therefore, in my mind, the way organizations should create themselves and organize is in such a way that that shock isn't there. And the way to do that is by creating real expectations. And particularly if you are going to, have some of your people leaving you, the way you do that and the humaneness around that and the way you treat them and the respect that you provide for them, and also the recognition, I think, of the pain that this could be really causing, because for some people this isn't just losing a job, this is losing status. This may be very difficult for them to explain to their friends or to their family, and to some degree it has a potential impact on your own self-worth. And so the consequences of this kind of change are quite profound. But of course the thing is that in many cases it feels unfair too, because what could I have done differently? Why is it me? So it's a very difficult time, and I think organizations that there are some pretty poor examples of where organizations have done this sort of change with a text or an email or something, which is really not a great way to do it. I think this is where your human resources department really comes into its own, and having the package and the support to help people through this, and then potentially into other opportunities, I think is really what will determine how people feel about your organization going forward.
Yeah, and because they could be customers in the future or recommend your company.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that the other part that people don't tune into, Malcolm, is the impact on those people who are left as well, because what they see are the scars and the pain and all the rest of it that goes with it. In the situation we're in now, which is one hopes is a temporary situation, I think I would be trying to make sure that the people that I am having to make redundant feel so positively about my organization that they will want to come back at some point in the future. But for the people who are left, often, they see the scars, they see the pain. This begins to build a picture for them as to how the organization thinks and what's important and how it values people. And the other thing I would say about that is, of course, for the people who are left, often there is a bigger load that they have to take, because often the finance director's pen is a pretty rough, weapon as the reduction in headcount is being put into play.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a tough time, and it's a tough time for managers as well, who often need to be having some really difficult conversations with people that maybe in the past they've never really had to, and I think it's a difficult time all around.
Yeah. So there's a clear message there. Put the humanity back into human capital. In your extensive experience, do
Mm.
leaders consult their people enough and early enough, and how the business can function more effectively in the future? Or does mushroom management still prevail?
Well, I think it varies, Malcolm. I think there are some really, really good leaders who you would recognize as good leaders even in ordinary times, and then there are also some people who are not so good. And we do as a nation. I don't think it's probably exclusive to the UK, but we do have a track record of promoting people in technical roles who are excellent in those technical roles into management roles where their skills, a natural propensity to be connected with their people and to support and to be able to talk and in a way which is and maintain and develop relationships, is questionable. And those are the guys, I think, and the girls that are going to have the most difficult time here. And I think what I would say is that really, as a nation, we should be upskilling leaders, and we should be a little bit I think increasingly we should be trying to get away from the idea that the only way you get a pay rise is to become a leader. It seems to me that technical contributors should be able to realize their financial aspirations without necessarily moving into an area that they're not really equipped for. So, to answer your question, I mean, I think there were, good leaders will handle this very well, very competently, very comfortably. But those leaders who are not so good will need a lot more support, and help, because it will be difficult. But they
Mm.
will just find it very difficult. And this is again where good HR departments can kind of come in and provide support and coaching and guidance, I think.
Mm. I know that at Advanced Workplace Associates, you provide a superb range of experiences, and don't forget everybody, the URLs behind me there. So how
Mm.
does Advanced Workplace Associates help a leader and his or her senior team plan for their future workplace need? Surely, with so much uncertainty around, that's hard to
Mm.
do.
Well, it is. It is, and it isn't. I mean, I think the trick is to appreciate what the levels of uncertainty actually are, and what the scenarios might be that you'd have to cope with. And the way that we go about doing it is, first of all, get to the nub of the truth about the true use of existing workplaces, the true needs that people have for their work, their real desires for flexibility and working in different ways and in different places and so on. And once we've understood that, that's kind of the human, the workforce view. There's also, by looking under the bonnet at the different functional needs that different units have, one can then begin to discern whether or not there is a need for a physical co-location, and what the characteristics of that might be. So our job really in this very complicated time that we're in is to understand what the users are looking for, what the organization rationally needs without too many opinions being in the way, and then putting those two things together to come up with what one might describe as a workplace proposition, which sets out very clearly how much space in different locations what it might need to do, what its purpose would be, and what the sort of style of its design might be. But at the same time, describing the practices and processes and policies and tools and training and everything that's needed to help people to be more flexible and be able to work in all sorts of places, not just homes. Because I think once you've got to that point, you've got an organization that's mature enough to be able to do that, then your decisions around real estate and stuff become a bit less sensitive, because you kind of know that you've got in place the platform upon which the organization can operate very effectively into the long term. And that's a lot of the work we're doing at the moment with clients, is really to get to the truth about what the future might look like, as opposed to perhaps what one or two senior leaders think is their model. I mean, I'm just to sort of point that up. Most companies and most surveys that we're seeing from our clients and outside our world suggest that at least about 70% of the population in white collar businesses want to work 2 or 3 days a week at home. Now, that desire is in my mind has been there for quite a long time. In fact, we've on the surveys that we did, we've seen that over and over. But that has been impeded by senior leaders in the past who maybe haven't completely understood it or tuned into it or been confident to handle it. Now, of course, that has now changed, but you still need, I think, to think very deeply about, okay, 70% is a big number, but is it real? Is it possible for every one of those people to be effective away from, an office space? Is it sensible that they need to be away all the time? Are there situations that would warrant them being in a central place? No, issues around regulatory requirements, for instance, or the need for some sort of access to some equipment, or the need to learn from people around them. So, you've got the quite complex mix, which I was talking about before. So getting from this idea that 70% of our people want to work from home to the reality of what is really going to work, is really, requires a much deeper dive into how the organization works, what its real needs are, what people are really looking for, and also, as you pointed out before, thinking about this in a variety of different scenarios, because one of the things that we can absolutely be sure about is that whatever you think is your need today is not going to be your need tomorrow. And to not consider that and how you might grow or shrink or change or whatever is foolish. I mean, the world is, you need flexibility in almost everything that you have now, I think, in order
Yeah, I love the way that at AWA you have that balance between, should we say, the physical thing, the layout of the offices, but also the emotional consideration, because I think that's really important. Otherwise you could get different cultures within office, those working there, those working from home, and so many problems occur. I want to just keep the focus on working from home.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to be something of the norm for the future? We've got COVID still hanging around and maybe going to be hurting us next year, January, or as some people suspect, is it merely a stepping stone to redundancy?
Well, I don't think I don't think you should see it naturally as a stepping stone to redundancy. I think many people now are looking for a greater level of flexibility. And, in many industries, the need for flexibility is being seen as shall we say, a promotional weapon to attract some of the good people who are around who don't want to conform with a traditional model. So I certainly wouldn't see it that way at all. I think it is around for the long term. I mean, I think for two reasons. One is, of course, we do have in the short to medium term the fear that people have of going into a central office. But I think more and more people are asking the question, well, look, we've worked very effectively over the last 4, 5, 6 months, and by the time we eventually the coast is really clear, that could be anything up to a 12-month period. So I think people are going to be saying, well, look, the business has worked pretty well. Why? Tell me again, why it is you want me to get up in the middle of the night and get on a train and sit in an office and do and I think also I can tell you finance directors are saying, hang on, why do we need all this expensive real estate in the center of towns? We don't. Do we really need this? And I know companies right now. I can't tell you who they are, but the big companies who are proactively saying, let's keep our people at home as long as we possibly can, because it's saving them a ton of money just in terms of keeping the buildings open, utilities bills, facilities management, and so on. So I think for lots of reasons. I think that the whole working away from the office thing is going to, is going to prevail into the long term and be part of an organization's workplace strategy. There are going to be some organizations that buck that trend, I think. And those are probably organizations where there is a real need for people to come together, perhaps for some of the reasons I mentioned before: creativity, serendipity, learning, whatever. But equally, there will be organizations, I think, who fall back into an old model of working because their leaders have still have a lens which is geared to an old model of working. And I think that would be very disappointing if they do that. But I can certainly see it happening, and I can see it not so much perhaps in the EU. I can certainly see organizations in parts of the East Coast of America heading in that direction, which is very different to what we see of, our contacts and clients in California, for instance, where, a number of IT companies have been very clear about the fact that people can now have the right to work from home. And certainly even the ones that aren't saying that are saying, we won't want you back in the office for, till the second quarter of next year. So it's, the genie's out of the bottle as far as I can see,
Yeah.
Malcolm.
Yeah, and I found it fascinating how many different ways of saving. For example, talking to the managing director of a fleet management company the other day, he's saying that companies are now doing requests for company cars at 5,000 miles a year compared to 15,000 was beforehand. And they're wanting smaller cars and so on. So let's get back to one of your key areas of substantial knowledge, and that's, of course, office design. Office design for the future. Reduced workspaces mean less space, less cost. How will tomorrow's desirable employees be different from today's, should we say, commuting employees?
Well, I think they will be people who are probably very self-standing, very confident, very competent, and who are running their lives as if they were almost self-employed traders, I think. They will be deciding upon, the way they want to live their lives, particularly those people who are in the upper echelons of consulting organizations, law firms, technology firms and so on. Yeah, I think in the area of where there's high levels of knowledge work, I think there's a high likelihood that those people will vote with their feet. Now, this isn't going to be something, and I think this is the tricky bit for leaders. This idea that we want to make this very simple is no longer available to us. There are going to be people for whom working away is much more desirable than others. If you take people who've possibly got kids and want to spend more time with them and, are pretty mature and self-standing, I can see there's plenty in it for them. I think there are people at a younger age, perhaps, who are, still learning their trade. Maybe they're not so well off, maybe not so well endowed with homes and mortgages and all the rest of it, who want social connectivity and who actually want to be in the centre of a city. And I think there are going to be all sorts of variations between those. So the essence of this is to create a workplace, which is a physical and a virtual thing, which tunes into their various different needs. And in the center, certainly if you require to have a physical space, then that physical space needs to be designed very, very carefully to enable you to do a variety of things tuned to what people are actually wanting to do. So, archetypally, people are talking about the need for the new workplace, the central workplace, to be predominantly a place where there is connectivity and social cohesion and social activity, which I wouldn't disagree. But there are going to be people, who live in and around a city, who have chosen to go there because you probably invited them to do that in the first place, who will still want to come into a physical place each day, or a large number of days. So you won't want to be turning those people away. You'll be wanting to provide some form of, office space for those people. You might provide it in a very flexible way, a bit more like a sort of a WeWork and so on. But we're going to have to think just about as much about what are those people going to want to do when they're in the office as what they do when they're not in the office. So, functionality needs to be thought through very carefully. And then, of course, depending upon the nature of the audience you're trying to attract and bring in, then you need to look at the sort of the contemporariness, if you like, of the workplace experience, and that's where I think design plays a big part in presenting your organization to the world in a different, and not just to your employees, but also to your clients as well, because I do think, depending on what industry you're in, clients are going to be wanting to see that you're not spending all their hard-earned fees or whatever it is you do on big lumps of real estate that actually add no value, and worse than that, they generate a stack of carbon, which is the other part of the workplace equation, it seems to me.
Yeah, park the posh car around the corner as well if you visit them. Andrew Mawson of Advanced Workplace Associates, as always, a revelation to speak to you, and thanks for this deeper dive into your experience thinking.
Pleasure, Malcolm. Thank you.